The blood-red sunset painted the Colorado Territory skies as Beatrice Winters clutched the crumpled letter in her trembling hands. "Unwelcome burden," her brother had written. "No longer able to accommodate your presence." The words stung worse than the dust whipping across her face as the stagecoach abandoned her at Silvercreek's desolate station, miles from anywhere a proper lady should be alone in 1876. Beatrice smoothed her worn travel dress, the only decent one she owned, and gazed at the ramshackle buildings comprising Silvercreek. 3 days of jolting travel had left her exhausted, hungry, and terrified. At 22, she'd never imagined her family would cast her aside after her father's death left them financially strained. Her slight limp from childhood polio and unmarried status had apparently rendered her worthless in their eyes. Stage driver said someone was arriving. A deep voice startled her. Beatrice turned to find a tall man regarding her with curious eyes. His face was sun-darkened and weathered beneath his wide-brimmed hat, but kindness lived in the creases around his eyes. His broad shoulders filled a dusty work shirt and worn leather chaps covered his legs. "I'm Vincent Sutton. Most folks call me Vince." He extended a calloused hand, then awkwardly withdrew it, seemingly remembering his manners. "Apologies, madam. You must be Beatrice Winters." She straightened her spine. "I am. How did you know? Your brother's letter arrived last week saying you'd be coming to work for the Crawfords." He gestured toward her single trunk. "That all your belongings?" Beatrice nodded, fighting back tears. Her brother hadn't even bothered telling her what arrangements he'd made. "Yes, I'm to work for the Crawfords." Vince's expression darkened. "Was the plan, madam, but there's been trouble. Typhoid swept through last month. Mrs. Crawford didn't make it. Mr. Crawford sold their place and moved east with the children." The ground seemed to sway beneath Beatrice's feet. "I see," she managed, though she saw nothing but impending disaster. "Perhaps there's lodging in town until I can make other arrangements." Vince removed his hat, revealing thick brown hair streaked with sun-bleached strands. "Silvercreek ain't much of a town, Miss Winters. No hotel to speak of. Just the saloon with rooms upstairs that." He cleared his throat. "Wouldn't suit a lady." Beatrice clutched her reticule tighter. "The meager funds inside wouldn't last a week." "There's my ranch," Vince continued. 8 miles out. My housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, could use help. I can offer you employment and proper lodging until you sort things out." Suspicion flared within her. "Why would you help a stranger, Mr. Sutton?" His eyes, the color of a summer sky, met hers directly. "Because I know what it's like to be cast aside by those who should care for you." He glanced at her trunk again. "And because no one should be left stranded in Silvercreek with night coming on." With limited options and darkness approaching, Beatrice reluctantly agreed. As Vince loaded her trunk onto his wagon, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. "It ain't much," Vince said as they bounced along a rutted trail, "but the Double S is honest work and growing. Started with nothing 5 years back. Now have 400 acres, decent cattle herd, some horses worth bragging about." Beatrice held tight to the wagon seat. "You built it yourself." "Every fence post and floorboard," he replied with quiet pride. "Though Mrs. Abernathy would say I need a woman's touch. Place is functional, not fancy." When they crested the hill, Beatrice saw a sprawling ranch house nestled against pine-covered foothills. Outbuildings formed a protective semicircle, and cattle dotted distant pastures. The house was larger than she'd expected, with a wide porch and multiple chimneys. "It's beautiful," she whispered, surprised by the longing that suddenly gripped her. "It's home," Vince replied simply. Mrs. Abernathy proved to be a no-nonsense woman in her 60s with a perpetual scowl that Beatrice suspected hid a kinder nature. She showed Beatrice to a small but clean room at the back of the house. "Boss says you're to help with household duties," the older woman explained. "Can you cook?" "Yes, though nothing fancy." "So, quite well, actually." Mrs. Abernathy nodded approvingly. "Good. Men here tear through clothes faster than rabbits multiply, reading and numbers." "I was a schoolteacher back in Pennsylvania," Beatrice admitted. The housekeeper's eyebrows rose. "Education, is it? Well then, you'll help with the ranch accounts too. Mr. Sutton's got the head for business but not the patience for ledgers." That night, exhausted but unable to sleep, Beatrice stared at the ceiling. What would become of her? Could she build a life here? Or was this merely another temporary harbor before being cast away again? Morning came with rooster crows and Mrs. Abernathy's brisk knock. "Up and at 'em, girl. Breakfast to make and men to feed." Beatrice quickly dressed and followed the housekeeper to the kitchen, where she was put to work kneading bread dough. When Vince and 3 ranch hands entered for breakfast, she kept her eyes lowered, focusing on her tasks. "Miss Winters," Vince acknowledged with a nod. "Sleep well?" "Yes, thank you," she replied, though dark circles beneath her eyes suggested otherwise. As days passed, Beatrice settled into ranch life. She assisted Mrs. Abernathy, took over mending, and gradually assumed responsibility for the account books. The physical work was demanding, but she welcomed the exhaustion that brought dreamless sleep. Vince observed her from a distance, impressed by her determination. One evening, finding her still working on ledgers by lamplight, he paused in the doorway. "You've organized everything," he noted, surveying the neat columns. Beatrice jumped, not having heard him approach. "I hope you don't mind. Your system was non-existent," he chuckled, moving closer to examine her work. "This is mighty impressive." "It's nothing special," she demurred. "Just how I kept school records." "Why'd you leave teaching?" he asked, leaning against the desk. Beatrice hesitated. "My father died last winter. The family home went to my brother Edward, his wife. She felt I was an unnecessary expense." Vince's face darkened. "Because of your leg." She stiffened. "Among other shortcomings, I'm 22, unmarried and with no prospects. A burden, as they noted repeatedly." "Your leg bothers them more than it bothers you," he observed. "I've had it since I was 8. I barely notice anymore." She closed the ledger. "Though others certainly do." Vince studied her thoughtfully. "Out here, folks value what you can do more than how you look doing it." He straightened. "Night, Miss Winters." As summer progressed, Beatrice found herself watching Vince when he wasn't aware. There was something compelling about his quiet strength and the gentle way he treated both animals and people. Unlike other men she'd known, he never seemed bothered by her limp or unmarried status. One afternoon, while hanging laundry, she observed him working with a spirited colt in the corral. His patience seemed endless as he coaxed the nervous animal to accept a saddle. When the colt finally stood calm beneath his touch, Vince's smile transformed his weathered face. "He's good with the difficult ones," Mrs. Abernathy commented, appearing beside her. "Always takes on the horses others give up on." "He seems to have endless patience," Beatrice replied. The older woman gave her a knowing look. "Not just with horses, girl." Before Beatrice could respond, riders appeared on the horizon. Vince immediately tensed, hand moving to the pistol at his hip. "Get inside," he called to Beatrice and Mrs. Abernathy. Now, 3 men approached, their manner suggesting they weren't friendly visitors. The leader, a burly man with a scarred face, reined in his horse and spat tobacco juice near Vince's boots. "Sutton," he growled. "Still squatting on Blackwell land, I see." "It's Sutton land now, legally purchased and paid for," Vince replied evenly. "What do you want, Harlan, Mr.?" "Blackwell sent me to deliver a message. He's offering to buy you out." One last friendly offer before things get complicated. Beatrice, watching from the window, saw Vince's shoulders stiffen. Tell Blackwell what I told him last time. This land isn't for sale. Not now, not ever. Harlan's grin revealed tobacco-stained teeth. He figured you'd say that. That's why he wanted me to mention how dangerous ranching can be. Accidents happen. Fires start. Cattle disappear. Vince's hand remained near his gun. That sounded mighty close to a threat, Harlan. Just stating facts, the man replied, wheeling his horse around. Think on it, Sutton. You're one man. Blackwell has connections all the way to Denver. After they departed, Vince remained staring after them until one of his ranch hands approached. Should we post extra guards tonight, boss? Vince nodded grimly. Double the watch on the north pasture and check the water sources. That evening, Beatrice found Vince on the porch, rifle across his knees. Who were those men? She asked. Blackwell's thugs, he replied, eyes scanning the darkness. He owns half the county and wants the rest, especially my water rights. Is he dangerous? Vince's silence was answer enough. Finally, he said, you should know this might get rough. If you want to leave, I'll arrange safe passage to Denver. The thought of leaving created an unexpected pang in Beatrice's chest. I'm not afraid, she said, surprising herself with the truth of it. He looked at her then, really looked at her, as though seeing something new. No, he said softly. I don't reckon you are. The next morning brought dark clouds and the acrid smell of smoke. Vince burst into the kitchen where Beatrice was preparing breakfast. Fire in the north pasture, he announced grimly. Blackwell's work, no doubt. The entire ranch mobilized, even Mrs. Abernathy grabbed buckets and headed for the well. Beatrice joined the effort, forming a bucket line despite her limp slowing her down. Hours later, exhausted and soot-covered, they had contained the blaze before it reached the main house or barn. But the north pasture lay scorched and dozens of cattle had scattered in panic. Could have been worse, Vince's foreman Miguel said, wiping his brow. Could have lost everything. This time, Vince replied darkly. That night, while treating burns on Vince's hands, Beatrice found her courage. Tell me about this feud with Blackwell. Vince winced as she applied salve. Roland Blackwell arrived in these parts 10 years ago, started buying up ranches, sometimes by force. When old man Winters, no relation to you, decided to sell this place, Blackwell assumed he'd get it. But you bought it instead, Vince nodded. I'd been working for Winters 5 years, saved every penny. When Blackwell offered half what it was worth, Winters sold to me instead, knowing I'd care for the land properly. And Blackwell has been trying to drive you out ever since. This is prime land, controls water access for 3 valleys. He flexed his bandaged hands. But it's more than that now, it's personal. He can't stand that a nobody who started as a ranch hand defied him. Beatrice finished wrapping his hands. You're hardly a nobody, Mr. Sutton. Their eyes met and something unspoken passed between them. Vince, he said quietly. After today, I think you've earned the right to call me Vince. The next weeks brought increased tensions. Fences were cut, cattle went missing, and twice Vince's men exchanged gunfire with mysterious riders in the night. Beatrice found herself constantly watching the horizon, heart racing at any sign of approaching horsemen. Despite the troubles, or perhaps because of them, she and Vince grew closer. Their conversations extended beyond ranch business into personal dreams and disappointments. She learned he'd been orphaned young, raised by a series of reluctant relatives, until striking out on his own at 16. He discovered her passion for books and teaching, and her secret desire to someday have a family of her own. Why did you never marry? He asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching lightning dance across distant mountains. Beatrice smiled sadly. No offers. My leg made me damaged goods in proper Pennsylvania society, and father needed me at home after mother died. Fools, all of them, Vince muttered. What about you? She asked, deflecting attention from herself. Surely eligible ranchers are scarce in these parts. His laugh held little humor. Been too busy building something worth passing on. Besides, most women take one look at this rough life and run the other direction. Their conversation was interrupted by Miguel riding hard into the yard. Boss, cattle rustlers at the East Ridge, at least 6 men. Vince was on his feet instantly, grabbing his rifle. Get everyone armed. Miss Winters, stay inside with Mrs. Abernathy. Before he could mount his horse, Beatrice caught his arm. Be careful, she urged, her eyes betraying more concern than she intended. He covered her hand with his. Always am. The ensuing hours were torturous as Beatrice paced the house, jumping at every distant gunshot. When Vince finally returned near dawn, his face was grim. One of his men had been shot, though not fatally, and a dozen cattle had been stolen. This can't continue, Beatrice said as she helped Mrs. Abernathy tend the wounded ranch hand. Someone will be killed. Not much choice, the injured man, Thomas, groaned. Blackwell won't stop until he gets what he wants. Later that day, a messenger arrived from town with a letter. Beatrice recognized her brother's handwriting and felt a chill of foreboding. She retreated to her room to read it privately. Edward's words were predictably cold. He had learned she never arrived at the Crawfords and demanded she return home immediately. Your behavior has caused significant embarrassment to the family name, he wrote. A position has been arranged for you as companion to Widow Rutledge. While not ideal, it is appropriate for someone of your limitations. Beatrice let the letter fall to her lap, tears burning her eyes. After everything, they still saw her only as a burden to be managed. The thought of returning to Pennsylvania, to a life of servitude to a demanding widow, filled her with dread. A knock at her door pulled her from these thoughts. Vince stood there, concern etched on his face. Bad news. He asked, nodding toward the letter. My brother, she explained, wiping away tears. He wants me to return home. He's arranged a position for me. Something flickered in Vince's eyes, disappointment perhaps. I see. When will you be leaving? The question hung between them. Beatrice realized with sudden clarity that she didn't want to leave. This ranch, with its dangers and difficulties, had become more home to her in weeks than her brother's house had been in years. I'm not, she said firmly, standing and folding the letter. I won't go back to being someone's burden. Relief washed over Vince's face. You've never been a burden here, Beatrice. If anything, you've been a blessing. The word struck her like a physical blow. A blessing. No one had ever described her that way before. I want to stay, she whispered. If you'll have me. Nothing would make me happier, he replied, his voice rough with emotion. They stood in silence, something new and fragile growing between them, until Miguel's voice called Vince away to deal with another crisis. That night, Beatrice wrote a reply to her brother, politely but firmly declining his generous offer, and informing him she had found meaningful employment and a place where she was valued. She didn't mention Vince specifically, knowing Edward would never understand. As summer turned to fall, the attacks on the ranch intensified. Blackwell seemed determined to break Vince before winter set in. The ranch hands grew jumpy, and everyone carried weapons, even while doing chores. One crisp October morning, Beatrice was gathering eggs when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Thinking it was one of the ranch hands returning, she continued her task until a shadow fell across the henhouse door. Well, well, what have we here? A voice drawled. Beatrice turned to find Harlan leering at her, 2 other men flanking him. Mr. Sutton isn't here, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. But his men are nearby. Harlan chuckled. Actually, they ain't. We made sure of that with a little distraction on the South Range. He dismounted, approaching her with menacing confidence. Mr. Blackwell would like a word with you. I have nothing to say to Mr. Blackwell, she replied, backing away. Wasn't asking, lady. Harlan reached for her arm. Beatrice swung the egg basket, catching him across the face. Eggs shattered, yolks dripping down his cheek. His companions laughed until Harlan's expression darkened dangerously. You'll regret that, he growled, grabbing her roughly. Let her go. Mrs. Abernathy's voice rang out. The older woman stood in the doorway of the house, shotgun leveled at Harlan's chest. Stay out of this, old woman, one of the other men warned, drawing his pistol. What happened next unfolded with terrible swiftness. Mrs. Abernathy fired, hitting the ground near Harlan's feet. The man with the pistol returned fire. Mrs. Abernathy crumpled to the porch. No, Beatrice screamed, tearing free from Harlan's grip and running toward the fallen housekeeper. Harlan caught her before she reached the steps. She's done for. And you're coming with us if you don't want the same for Sutton. Beatrice fought like a wildcat, but ultimately found herself thrown over a saddle, hands bound. As they rode away, she caught one last glimpse of Mrs. Abernathy's motionless form on the porch steps. They rode for hours into increasingly rugged country. Finally, they approached a sprawling ranch house that made Vince's home look modest by comparison. A portly man with silver hair and cold eyes waited on the porch. Mr. Blackwell, Harlan announced, brought you something that might interest Sutton more than that land. Blackwell studied Beatrice as she was roughly dismounted. I see. And who might this young lady be? His woman, Harlan replied with a smirk. Been living at his place for months now. Blackwell's eyebrows rose. Is that so? Bring her inside. Gently, Harlan. We're not barbarians. The interior of Blackwell's home displayed ostentatious wealth crystal chandeliers, imported furniture, and oil paintings in gilded frames. Beatrice was escorted to a study where Blackwell offered her a seat. My apologies for Harlan's crude methods, he said, pouring himself a whiskey. But business sometimes requires directness. You've killed Mrs. Abernathy, Beatrice accused, tears threatening. Blackwell frowned at Harlan. Is this true? She pulled a shotgun, Harlan defended. Wasn't my doing anyway, it was Wade who shot her. Blackwell sighed. Unfortunate, but perhaps it will motivate Mr. Sutton to be reasonable. He turned to Beatrice. You seem like an intelligent woman. Surely you understand that his resistance is futile. I control this county. The law, the banks, the railroad all answer to me. Vince will never sell to you, Beatrice stated with certainty. For land? Perhaps not, but for you, Blackwell smiled coldly. Every man has his price, my dear. Even the noble Vincent Sutton. A messenger was dispatched to the Double S with Blackwell's new terms, the ranch in exchange for Beatrice's safe return. As night fell, Beatrice was locked in an upstairs bedroom, her mind racing between grief for Mrs. Abernathy and fear for what Vince might do. She examined the room for possible escape routes, finding only a window that overlooked a steep drop to rocky ground below. The door was solid oak, the lock sturdy. She was contemplating using bedsheets as a rope when she heard voices in the hallway. Mr. Blackwell says to bring her down, a man instructed. Sutton's been spotted approaching. Beatrice's heart leapt. Vince had come for her, just as she'd known he would, but she feared it was a trap. Downstairs, she was positioned prominently in the study, Harlan standing guard behind her chair. Blackwell sat behind his massive desk, looking pleased with himself. He came alone, he asked the messenger. Far as we could tell, riding hard. Blackwell nodded approvingly. Desperate men make foolish choices. Minutes later, boots sounded on the porch, followed by a firm knock. When the door opened, Vince stood framed in the entrance, dusty and grim-faced, his eyes immediately finding Beatrice. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. "No," she answered, voice catching. "But Mrs. Abernathy, I know," he cut her off, pain evident in his expression. "Miguel found her." Blackwell rose. "Tragic business that, not what I ordered, I assure you." "Save it," Vince growled. "I'm here for Beatrice, nothing else." "Of course," Blackwell agreed smoothly. "After our business is concluded." He gestured to papers on his desk. "The deed transfer. Sign it and Miss Winters walks out with you." Vince's jaw tightened as he glanced at Beatrice again. "And if I refuse?" Harlan's hand moved to rest on Beatrice's shoulder, making her flinch. "Don't," she pleaded with Vince. "The ranch is your life's work, everything you've built." "Not everything," Vince replied softly, his eyes never leaving hers. The realization of what he meant washed over her. In that moment, despite their circumstances, joy flickered within her. Vince approached the desk, took the pen Blackwell offered, and leaned over the document. "Wise decision," Blackwell said smugly. Instead of signing, Vince suddenly flipped the heavy desk toward Blackwell, sending the older man sprawling. In the same motion, he drew his revolver and fired at the oil lamp, plunging the room into darkness. Chaos erupted. Beatrice felt herself yanked from the chair. "Run!" Vince's voice commanded near her ear. Gunshots echoed through the house as they fled down a hallway. Outside, more shots rang out. "My men," Vince explained breathlessly as they reached the stables. "Wasn't foolish enough to come alone." They mounted a horse together, Vince pulling her up behind him. As they galloped away from Blackwell's ranch, Beatrice clung to his waist, feeling safer despite the bullets flying around them. They rode hard until reaching a prearranged meeting point where Miguel and the others waited. The reunion was brief as they continued toward home, alert for pursuit. "What will happen now?" Beatrice asked as they finally slowed their pace, the double S visible in the distance. "Blackwell won't stop," Vince admitted. "But neither will I." When they reached the ranch, Mrs. Abernathy's body had been laid out in the parlor, her face peaceful in death. Beatrice wept openly and Vince stood beside her, his own grief evident. "She saved my life," Beatrice whispered. "Tried to, at least. She was family," Vince said simply. "Just like you are now." They buried Mrs. Abernathy the next day on a hillside overlooking the ranch. Afterwards, Vince called his men together. "Blackwell won't wait long to retaliate," he told them. "Anyone who wants to leave, now's the time. No hard feelings." Not a single man stepped forward. Miguel spoke for all of them. "This is our home too, boss. We stand together." Preparations began immediately. Defenses were fortified, supplies stockpiled, and sentries posted day and night. Beatrice threw herself into these efforts, determined not to be helpless when Blackwell's men returned. 3 tense days passed before a dust cloud on the horizon signaled their approach, but something was different. "That ain't Blackwell's men," Miguel said, lowering his spyglass. "That's the sheriff, and a whole lot of others." Sheriff Taylor rode at the head of nearly 20 men, including several wearing badges from neighboring counties. When they reached the ranch, the sheriff dismounted and approached Vince with surprising deference. "Mr. Sutton," he greeted, "got some news you'll want to hear." Inside, the sheriff explained the dramatic shift in circumstances. Roland Blackwell was found dead this morning, shot in his study. Vince and Beatrice exchanged shocked glances. "His foreman Harlan is claiming it was you," the sheriff continued, "but we found Blackwell's ledgers. Detailed records of bribes, threats, even orders for killings going back years. Enough to hang Harlan and half of Blackwell's men twice over." "Who shot him?" Vince asked. "Near as we can figure, one of his own men. Several disappeared after your rescue mission." The sheriff eyed them knowingly. "Speaking of which, That was mighty risky, Sutton. Some things are worth the risk, Vince replied, his hand finding Beatrice's. The sheriff noticed but didn't comment. Anyway, with Blackwell gone and his operation being dismantled, thought you should know you're not in danger anymore. After the sheriff departed, a weight seemed to lift from the ranch. The men celebrated around a bonfire that night, the relief palpable. Vince, however, remained subdued. Beatrice found him on the porch, staring at the stars. "You don't seem as happy as I expected," she observed, joining him. "A man died," he said quietly. "Even Blackwell can't celebrate that." She touched his arm gently. "That's why I—" She hesitated, then continued, "Why I care for you, Vincent Sutton, your decency." He turned to face her, moonlight silvering his features. "Just care for—" Beatrice's heart thundered in her chest. "You know it's more. Say it," he whispered, moving closer. "I need to hear it." "I love you," she admitted, the words both terrifying and liberating. "Though I have nothing to offer you but everything," he interrupted. "You offer everything I've ever wanted." His calloused hands cradled her face. "I've loved you since you reorganized my ledgers and told me my system was non-existent." Her laugh dissolved into tears as he kissed her, gently at first, then with growing passion. When they finally separated, Vince rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. "Build this life with me. Let me show you every day that you're not a burden but a blessing, the greatest blessing I've ever known." They married 2 weeks later in Silvercreek's small church. The entire ranch attended, along with townsfolk curious about the woman who had captured the reserved rancher's heart. Beatrice wore a new dress sewn by the local dressmaker and carried wildflowers gathered that morning. As winter settled over the ranch, Beatrice and Vince established new routines. She took over managing the household and continued keeping the accounts, while also starting a small school for the children of ranch hands. In the evenings, they would sit before the fire, planning for spring and the future they would build together. "I received another letter from Edward," Beatrice mentioned one such evening in December. Vince looked up from the book she had been reading aloud to him. "What does your charming brother want now?" "To express his disappointment in my hasty and ill-considered marriage," she quoted with a wry smile. "And to inform me that I am no longer welcome in the family home should my frontier experiment fail." Vince set aside the book and pulled her onto his lap. "And what did you tell him?" "That I've never been happier or more fulfilled," she replied, tracing his jawline with her finger. "That my husband values me for exactly who I am, and that I've found my true home." "All true," he murmured, kissing her softly. "I also invited him to visit next summer," she added with a mischievous smile. "Thought he might benefit from seeing how the other half lives." Vince laughed. "I'd pay good money to see Edward Winters mucking out stalls." As snow blanketed the Colorado landscape, transforming the ranch into a winter wonderland, Beatrice reflected on how drastically her life had changed in less than a year. From unwanted burden to cherished wife, from uncertain future to purposeful present, spring brought new life to the Double S. Calves were born, fields greened, and Beatrice discovered she was expecting their first child. When she shared the news with Vince, his joy was boundless. He lifted her in a gentle embrace, his eyes suspiciously damp. "A family of our own," he whispered in wonder. "Something I never thought I'd have." "Nor I," she admitted. "My family made me believe I was unworthy of such happiness." Vince's expression hardened. "They were wrong about you, dead wrong." As Beatrice's pregnancy progressed, Vince became increasingly protective, hiring additional help so she could rest more. She indulged his concern while still maintaining her role in ranch operations, adapting her duties as needed. In late autumn, their daughter arrived after a difficult labor that left Vince pacing outside their bedroom for hours. When finally allowed to enter, he approached the bed with reverence, gazing at his exhausted wife and the tiny bundle in her arms. "Meet your daughter," Beatrice said softly, pulling back the blanket to reveal a perfect face with Vince's blue eyes. "She's beautiful," he whispered, carefully taking the infant, "just like her mother." They named her Victoria Abernathy Sutton, honoring both Vince's mother and the woman who had given her life protecting Beatrice. Life settled into a new rhythm centered around Victoria's needs. The ranch continued to prosper, with Vince expanding operations and building a reputation for quality livestock. Beatrice's small school grew to accommodate children from neighboring ranches, eventually becoming the foundation for Silvercreek's first proper schoolhouse. On Victoria's first birthday, an unexpected visitor arrived. Edward Winters, looking uncomfortable and out of place, stood awkwardly on their porch. "Edward," Beatrice greeted, surprise evident in her voice. "This is unexpected." Her brother removed his hat. "I was in Denver on business. Thought I should see how you were faring." Vince appeared behind her, Victoria in his arms. "Mr. Winters," he acknowledged coolly. Edward's eyes widened at the sight of his niece. "You have a child." "This is Victoria," Beatrice confirmed. "Your niece." An uncomfortable silence stretched between them until Victoria, with perfect timing, offered a gummy smile to her uncle. Something in Edward's stern countenance softened. "Would you like to come in?" Beatrice offered, not entirely sure she wanted him to accept. To her surprise, he did. The visit was strained at first, with Edward clearly shocked by the scale and success of the operation Vince and Beatrice had built. As the day progressed, he gradually relaxed, even holding Victoria briefly. Before departing, Edward pulled Beatrice aside. "I may have misjudged your situation," he admitted stiffly. "You seem well settled." "I am happy," she replied simply. "Happier than I ever imagined possible." Edward nodded awkwardly. "Mother would have been pleased." It was the closest thing to an apology she would receive, but Beatrice accepted it with grace. After he left, Vince found her on the porch, watching her brother's departing figure. "You all right?" he asked, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Yes," she answered truthfully. "I don't need his approval anymore. I know my worth now." Vince kissed her temple. "You always were worth everything. Just took someone seeing it to help you believe it." As years passed, the Double S Ranch became one of the most successful operations in Colorado territory. Vince and Beatrice welcomed 2 more children, a son, Samuel, and another daughter, Eleanor. The ranch expanded to include a thriving horse breeding program that Beatrice managed alongside her educational efforts. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Vince surprised Beatrice with a trip to Denver, leaving the children in the capable hands of Miguel's wife. In their hotel room, he presented her with a small velvet box. "What's this?" she asked, opening it to find a delicate gold locket. "Open it," he urged. Inside was a miniature sketch of their family on one side. On the other, an inscription, "Not a burden, but my blessing." Tears filled Beatrice's eyes as she looked up at the man who had changed her life. "10 years ago, I thought my life was over when that stagecoach left me in Silvercreek. Instead, it was just beginning," Vince finished, taking her hands in his. "For both of us." "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Taking in a stranger that day?" "Not for one moment," he replied with absolute conviction. "Best decision I ever made was not letting you go." Later that night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness, Beatrice reflected on how completely her perception of herself had transformed. The young woman who had once believed herself worthless now recognized her strength, her capabilities, her essential value, not despite her differences but inclusive of them. "What are you thinking about?" Vince murmured sleepily beside her. "How fortunate I am that my family thought me a burden," she replied. "Otherwise, I might never have found my way to you." "Their loss," he said, pulling her closer. "My eternal gain." When they returned to the Double S, they were greeted by their children running down the path, faces alight with joy. Victoria, now 9 and the image of her mother but with Vince's determined spirit, led the charge. Samuel, 7 and already talking of becoming a rancher like his father, was close behind. Little Alina, just 4, squealed with delight as Vince swung her into the air. Standing on the porch of the home they had built together, surrounded by the family they had created, Beatrice felt a profound sense of belonging. The unwanted burden had become the essential cornerstone of something beautiful and enduring. That evening, as the children played and the sun painted the Colorado sky in brilliant hues, Vince found Beatrice watching their daughters arranging wildflowers in the garden. "Sometimes I can hardly believe this is real," she confessed as he joined her. "That this is my life." "Believe it," he said, his arm finding its familiar place around her waist. "You made it happen, Beatrice. Your strength, your determination." She leaned into him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "We made it happen, together." As darkness fell and they called the children inside, Beatrice took one last look at the sprawling ranch illuminated by the rising moon. From uncertain beginnings had come this abundance of love, of purpose, of belonging. She had journeyed from burden to blessing, and in doing so had found not just a husband who valued her, but her own capacity to create a life of meaning and joy. Taking Vince's outstretched hand, Beatrice stepped into their home, into the warmth and light of the family that had chosen her, just as she had chosen them. And in that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that she would never let go.